Flynn was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea that was growing cold in his hands. The last few days had been a whirlwind of doubts and fears. His nephews had come to visit again, insisting that a nursing home would be the best place for him, and he couldn't shake off that dark idea. He felt lost, as if he were being swept away by a current he didn't have the strength to fight. Andrew and Nicholas arrived that afternoon, their voices filled with a false concern that Flynn didn't want to believe was insincere. They sat across from him, Andrew with a serious expression and Nicholas, as always, distracted by his phone. "Uncle, have you thought about what we talked about?" Andrew asked, breaking the heavy silence that hung in the air. Flynn raised his tired eyes, searching for some trace of sincerity in the words, something that would give him comfort. "I have, yes, but I'm still not sure if I'm ready to leave all this behind." "We understand. It's a difficult decision," Andrew said, leaning slightly forward as if to share something important. "But you need to think about what's best for you. We love you, Uncle, and we want you to be safe." Flynn sighed, feeling the weight of those words deepen in his soul. He always wanted to believe that his nephews loved him, but the shadow of doubt grew in his heart. Still, he was tired, so tired of being alone, of fighting the inevitable. "I just don't want to be a burden to you," he murmured, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed eternal. Nicholas, finally looking up from his phone, gave a slight smile, which Flynn interpreted as understanding. "You're not a burden, Uncle, but living alone like this, it's not fair to you. In the nursing home, you'll have everything you need, and we can visit you whenever we want." "Visit whenever you want?" Flynn repeated to himself, as if those words echoed in a void he didn't know how to fill. The idea of becoming a visit, an occasional obligation for those who should be his family, cut him deeply. Andrew noticed the hesitation and became more insistent. "Look, Uncle, we've already taken care of everything. They have a spot for you in a very good place with excellent care. You don't have to worry about anything. We just want you to be happy and well taken care of." Flynn looked at the cup in his hands, now cold like the feeling that invaded his chest. He remembered the time when he took care of everything, the house, the family, himself. And now, here he was, being convinced that he was no longer capable of anything, not even deciding what was best for his own life. "If you think this is best for me," his voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Andrew smiled, relieved, while Nicholas was already searching for information on his phone about the nursing home. "Are you sure, Uncle? We can take care of this today if you want." Flynn felt a tear roll down his cheek, quickly wiped away by his trembling hand. Yes, I trust you." The feeling of abandonment that enveloped him at that moment was overwhelming. It was as if he were saying goodbye to himself, handing over his life to those who saw more value in what he possessed than in who he was. Flynn felt like an old rag, discarded, without use, without purpose. He knew that as he crossed the door of the nursing home, something inside him would break forever. But he was tired of fighting, tired of being the only one who cared about what was left of his life. And so, in a silent gesture of resignation, Flynn accepted the fate his nephews had chosen for him. The morning was cold and cloudy when the car stopped in front of the nursing home. Flynn, sitting in the back seat, looked out the window at the gray and imposing building that loomed before him. It looked more like a hospital than a home, with its austere walls and narrow windows. Flynn's heart felt heavy as a stone in his chest. He felt as if he were being taken to a prison from which there would be no escape. Andrew turned off the engine and turned to Flynn with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're here, Uncle. It's going to be good for you, you'll see." Flynn didn't respond. He just nodded, feeling his body numb with sadness. Nicholas, impatient, had already gotten out of the car and was unloading the bags with quick, indifferent movements. When Flynn finally got out of the car, the cutting autumn wind enveloped him, making him shiver. He looked up at the sky, gray and oppressive, before being led inside the nursing home by his nephews. The interior of the building was as desolate as the exterior. The strong smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of a clock ticking filled the air. Flynn was greeted by a nurse with a tired face, who guided them through long, monotonous corridors where closed doors hid the secrets of forgotten lives. "This will be your room, Mr. Flynn," the nurse said, opening a door with a number engraved on a metal plate. The room was small, with a single bed, a chair by the window, and a tiny wardrobe. There was nothing that reminded him of home, nothing that belonged to him. "It's simple but comfortable," the nurse continued, while Flynn remained standing at the entrance, unable to take the next step. Andrew entered behind him, placing the bags on the floor without much care. "It's going to be okay, Uncle," Andrew said, trying to sound encouraging. "You'll get used to it." Flynn finally entered the room, each step heavy, as if he were walking to his own funeral. He sat on the bed, sinking his fingers into the rough, cheap blanket that didn't warm him, but left a feeling of discomfort on his skin. The feeling of abandonment was overwhelming. "I think I need a moment alone," he murmured, without looking up. Andrew and Nicholas exchanged impatient glances. "Of course, Uncle. We'll let you rest," Andrew replied, while Nicholas was already heading for the door. "We'll come back to see you soon." Flynn knew that was an empty promise. He knew that, as that door closed, they would leave, return to their lives, leaving him behind like an inconvenient memory. When the door closed, the silence that followed was deafening. He looked around at the impersonal, cold room that was now his home. The window looked out onto the nursing home garden, where a few bare trees swayed sadly in the wind. Flynn stood up, walking to the window. He wondered how many desperate gazes that glass had reflected. How many before him had felt this way, discarded, abandoned, without a future. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned slowly, expecting to see a friendly face, but all he found was the nurse, entering with a tray of food without any enthusiasm. "It's lunchtime," she said, placing the tray on the table next to the bed. "Try to eat a little. You'll feel better." Flynn looked at the food, a lifeless mix of mashed potatoes and meat that seemed to have no taste. He shook his head, not wanting to eat. The nurse left without insisting, closing the door behind her and leaving Flynn alone again. He returned to the window, watching the dead leaves that the wind lifted and deposited on the ground. Everything seemed so distant, so meaningless. The life he knew, the life he built, had disappeared, and what remained was only a shadow of what it once was. He felt the tears burn his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he sat in the chair by the window, staring at nothing, while time seemed to drag on, without purpose, without hope. Flynn began to lose track of time, of the days, of the difference between one meal and the next. Everything blended into a whirlwind of loneliness and despair. The idea that this place would be his final destination began to take root in his heart, and with it, despair grew, slow and merciless, until all that remained was a deep and silent pain. Flynn's days at the nursing home dragged on without color, without taste. Each morning seemed like a melancholic repetition of the previous one, an endless extension of loneliness. He spent most of his time sitting in the chair by the window, watching the desolate garden where a few flowers struggled to survive the encroaching cold. It was on one of these mornings, as the sun struggled to break through the dense clouds, that Flynn noticed a different aroma in the air. It wasn't the bland smell of the nursing home food, but something more comforting, almost familiar. He inhaled deeply, as if that simple gesture could bring back a lost memory. Curious, he stood up, his slow and uncertain steps guiding him out of the room and into the hallway. He followed the scent to the kitchen, a place he had never explored since his arrival. As he entered, Flynn saw her for the first time, a woman with dark skin and black hair tied in a hurried bun, working skillfully over the stove. She was humming a soft melody, almost imperceptible, as she stirred a pot of soup. Flynn stood at the entrance, not knowing what to say, just watching the scene that, in some way, brought an unexpected warmth to his chest. Lena, noticing Flynn's presence, turned and looked at him with a welcoming smile, the kind of smile that seemed rare in that place. "Hola, senor," she said, her voice carrying a slight Cuban accent that gave a musical touch to her words. "Can I help you with something?" Flynn, caught off guard, took a moment to respond. "I was just following the smell. Something smells good." Lena laughed softly, a warm laugh that contrasted with the coldness around them. "It's the chicken soup. My mother taught me to make it when I was little, back in Cuba. It helps to warm the heart." Flynn felt a lump in his throat. It had been so long since he had experienced something made with care, something that reminded him of the warmth of a home. "I don't know if I still have a heart to warm," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Lena furrowed her brow, moving a little closer. "We all do, sir. Sometimes, it just needs a little care to start beating strongly again." Flynn looked into her eyes, and for the first time since he arrived at the nursing home, he felt a spark of life. This woman, despite the visible marks of suffering on her face, radiated an inner strength that he couldn't understand. Have you worked here for a long time?" "For a few years," Lena replied, turning back to the pot and stirring the soup carefully. "I came here after things got tough in my life. The nursing home, gave me a job, and I do my best to make the residents' days a little less sad. Tough? Flynn asked, intrigued by that brief confession. Lena paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Yes, very tough. Divorced, 2 children to raise alone, and not many options. But I learned to survive, and here I am. Flynn felt a connection, something that went beyond words. They were 2 wounded souls, each carrying their own burdens. It must be difficult, doing this every day. Lena shrugged, but didn't lose her smile. It's what I do best. Cooking, caring. It's my way of continuing. And you? What brought you here? Flynn hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain the silent betrayal of his nephews? The pain of abandonment? He just shook his head. Life brought me here. Lena nodded, understanding without needing explanations. Then, how about a bowl of my soup? It won't fix everything, but it might help for today. Flynn looked at her, and for the first time, allowed himself a shy smile. I would love that. Lena served the soup in a simple bowl and handed it to Flynn, who sat in a chair near the kitchen table. He tasted the first spoonful and, in that instant, felt something more than the warm, comforting taste. He felt a small, almost imperceptible, awakening of hope. As he ate in silence, Lena returned to her work, but the atmosphere around them seemed less cold, less oppressive. Flynn didn't know exactly what had changed, but he knew that, in some way, Lena's presence had broken the darkness that had enveloped him since he arrived at the nursing home. And so, in that unexpected encounter, something began to change within Flynn. A friendship, forged amid pain and loneliness, began to blossom. The days at the nursing home began to take on a new rhythm for Flynn. What was once a routine marked by silence and loneliness now had a point of light that he eagerly awaited: his conversations with Lena. The kitchen, with its gentle warmth and welcoming aromas, had become a refuge for both of them. Flynn usually appeared around mid-morning, when Lena started preparing lunch. He would enter silently, still a little hesitant, and sit in his usual chair next to the stove, where the heat of the fire helped to drive away the cold that seemed to have taken root in his heart. "Good morning, Mr. Flynn," Lena would greet him with a smile, while chopping vegetables or stirring a boiling pot. "Good morning, Lena," he would reply, his voice softer than usual, almost as if he feared breaking the magic of that moment. At first, the conversations were short, timid. Flynn would ask about the dishes Lena prepared, and she would respond with a contained joy, explaining recipes that brought memories of her childhood in Cuba. But over time, the words flowed more freely. It was as if the heat of the stove thawed not only the atmosphere, but also the defenses that both had built around themselves. "Lena, did you always want to be a cook?" Flynn asked one morning, while watching her knead dough with precise movements. Lena smiled, a smile full of nostalgia. "No, Mr. Flynn. Actually, I wanted to be a teacher, but life had other plans. I had to leave my studies when my first child was born. There was no time for dreams when there were mouths to feed." Flynn nodded, recognizing the weight of those words. "And do you regret it?" She paused for a moment, her eyes fixed on the dough in her hands. "Sometimes, but I learned that life gives us different paths than we imagine. I learned to love what I do. Cooking is a way of caring for people, of giving them a little comfort, even if it's just through a meal." Flynn felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of food that way, but it made sense. Since he started frequenting the kitchen, he felt less alone, less forgotten. "You have a generous soul, Lena." She laughed, shaking her head. "If I do, it was shaped by circumstances. I had to be strong. It wasn't easy raising 2 children alone, especially in a foreign country. But I did what needed to be done." Flynn watched her in silence, admiring the strength of this woman. "You are stronger than many I know, Lena. I was a businessman all my life, always thinking about numbers, about profits. I never knew what was really important until I lost it." Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with silent compassion. "Lost what, Mr. Flynn?" Flynn looked away, staring at the flames of the stove, as if in them he could find the answers he had lost over the years. "I think I lost life while trying to control it. I lost friends, opportunities to be with my family, and in the end, all that was left were things that have no value at all." Lena moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his. There's still time, Mr. Flynn. Time to find something that has value. Sometimes it's in the small things, the small joys. Flynn held Lena's hand, feeling the quiet strength that emanated from her. These conversations with you, they're the best part of my day. Lena smiled again, a smile that warmed more than the fire beside them. And they are mine too, Mr. Flynn. It's good to have someone to talk to share the pains and, who knows, find a little joy in the midst of it all. The conversations by the stove continued, day after day, each one revealing a little more of the scars they both carried, but also of the hopes that still persisted. Flynn began to realize that, despite everything, life still offered him something precious, a true friendship, built on the complicity of suffering and the strength to move forward. They didn't just talk about sadness. There were moments of laughter when Lena told stories of her childhood in Cuba, of adventures she and her siblings invented on the streets of Havana. Flynn found himself laughing, a genuine laugh that he hadn't known for a long time. You should have been a storyteller, Flynn said on one of these occasions, with a sparkle in his eyes that Lena had never seen before. Maybe I missed my chance, she replied, winking at him. But it's good to know I can still bring a little joy to someone. And so, in that small space of the nursing home kitchen, two lives marked by pain found a little relief. Each word, each smile exchanged, was a reminder that, even in the midst of darkness, there was still light. Time passed, and Flynn's visits to the kitchen became an essential part of his days. With each conversation, a little more of their lives was laid bare, as if they were unearthing memories long buried. Flynn, who had once been reserved, began to open up to Lena in a way he never imagined possible. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly on the windows, Lena was preparing tea, and the aroma of herbs filled the air. Flynn, sitting in his usual chair, seemed more thoughtful than usual. Lena noticed the heavy silence and approached with a cup of hot tea. "What's weighing on your mind today, Mr. Flynn?" she asked, with a gentleness that seemed to penetrate the deepest layers of his soul. Flynn took the cup, but didn't drink. He looked at the steaming liquid, as if there he could see the ghosts of his past. "Lena, do you believe someone can regret an entire life?" Lena furrowed her brow, sitting down beside him. "I believe we all carry regrets, Mr. Flynn. But an entire life? What happened to make you feel this way?" Flynn sighed, a tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of the years. "I spent most of my life chasing what I thought was success. I worked hard, built an empire. But in the end, what did that really bring me? I lost so much along the way." Lena watched him, her eyes reflecting the pain he was about to share. "What did you lose?" "Love," Flynn said, his voice almost a whisper. "There was a woman a long time ago. She was everything I didn't know I needed. But I let her go. I chose work, I chose money. And now, I think about her every day, wondering what could have been." Lena felt a tightness in her chest as she heard Flynn's words. There was a sadness in his voice that she recognized well, for she too carried her own regrets. It's never easy choosing between what we desire and what we think we need to do. "And your nephews? Do they know this part of your life?" Flynn shook his head, a bitter smile curving his lips. "They don't care about that. To them, I was always the rich uncle, the man who could provide. They never care about the man behind the money. And I never knew how to be anything else to them." Lena placed her hand over his, squeezing gently. "You can't blame yourself for that, Flynn. Sometimes, people can't see beyond what's on the surface. But that doesn't mean you failed as a person." Flynn looked at her, feeling more vulnerable than he had ever allowed himself to be. "And you, Lena? How do you keep smiling, even after everything you've been through?" She looked away, as if the words were hard to find. "Sometimes, the smile is the only thing I have left, Flynn. I married young, full of dreams and hopes. But life wasn't kind. My husband, well, he wasn't the man I thought he was. And when he left me with 2 children to raise alone. Every day was a struggle, but I couldn't let myself give up. My children needed me to be strong." Flynn felt a deep pain as he heard this. "It must have been horrible, Lena. How did you manage to go on?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if reliving each struggle, each tear shed in silence. "I went on because I had no choice. There was no one to help me. I had to work, I had to fight, and in the process, I lost a part of myself. But I always believed that, in some way, everything I did was to ensure that my children had a better life. Flynn held Lena's hand more tightly, as if the gesture could ease some of the pain she carried. You are an incredible woman, Lena. I wish I had known someone like you before, someone who could teach me the true value of things. Lena smiled sadly, feeling the depth of the connection that was forming between them. Life has a strange way of showing us what really matters, Flynn. Maybe it's not too late to find a little peace. Flynn didn't respond immediately, but he felt a silent tear roll down his cheek. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to cry, not just for the lost opportunities, but also for the relief of finally sharing his burden. Lena, beside him, remained silent, holding his hand, understanding that sometimes the greatest form of comfort comes simply from being present. The memories and confessions they shared in that kitchen became a bridge between two worlds of pain and regret. And in those moments, each word spoken seemed like a small redemption, a chance to reconcile with their past and perhaps, just perhaps, find a new way to live, even if time was short. With each passing day, Lena's presence seemed to transform the world around Flynn. The nursing home, which had once been a cold shadow where the hours dragged in oppressive silence, began to come alive in subtle but powerful ways. It was as if, by sharing his pains and memories with Lena, Flynn was rediscovering parts of himself that he had buried long ago. One afternoon, Flynn was sitting in the garden, watching the few flowers that still resisted the autumn. The wind carried a faint scent of wet earth, and he breathed deeply, as if trying to absorb all the life that still remained around him. Lena approached, bringing a blanket to cover him. She sat down beside him, silent but present as always. "It's strange, Lena," Flynn said, breaking the silence with a serene voice. "I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this." Lena looked at him, her eyes expressing understanding. "Peace is where we find it, Flynn. Sometimes it appears in the most unlikely places." He nodded, still looking at the flowers. "Before, all I saw here were walls that confined me, empty days. Now I see that there's more. There's life, even if it's fragile, even if it's small." Lena smiled, a smile that carried both relief and sadness. "You found something important, Flynn, something that many of us search for our whole lives." "And what is that?" he asked, turning to her. "A reason to keep going. It doesn't matter how much time we have left. What matters is what we do with it," Lena replied, her eyes shining with a wisdom that came from experience and pain. Flynn reflected on her words, feeling a new strength growing within him. "I didn't know how lost I was until I met you, Lena. I thought my life was over, that I had already lived everything there was to live. But you showed me that there's still something more." Lena lowered her gaze for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions. "You gave me something too, Flynn. Something I thought I had lost a long time ago. A true friendship." Flynn reached out and took Lena's hand, a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. "I never imagined I would find someone like you here in this place. You brought light to my darkness." Lena felt her eyes fill with tears, but she kept her voice steady. "You brought light to mine as well, Flynn. I was never one to have many friends. Life taught me to be cautious, not to expect much from others. But with you it's different. I feel like I can be myself." Flynn squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on hers. "I know time is short, Lena, but as long as we have these moments, I want to live them fully. I want you to know how much you mean to me." Lena smiled through the tears that now flowed freely down her face. "And you mean the world to me, Flynn. I never thought I would find someone who understood me so well, who saw beyond the scars and the weariness." They sat in silence for a long time, simply appreciating each other's company, with no need for words. The garden around them seemed less gloomy, more welcoming, as if reflecting the change that was happening within them. Flynn began to see the nursing home with new eyes. It was no longer a prison, but a place where he had found something truly precious. He started to engage more, to participate in activities, to talk to other residents. The simple act of connecting with Lena had awakened in him a desire to live that he thought he had lost forever. One day, during one of their walks in the garden, Lena looked at Flynn with a curious sparkle in her eyes. "Flynn, Have you ever thought about writing your memoirs? Flynn laughed softly, but the idea touched him in an unexpected way. Who would want to read the stories of an old man like me? Lena gave him a playful tap on the arm. I would, and I bet many others would too. You have so much to say, so much to share. Your experiences, they're valuable, Flynn. He fell silent for a moment, considering the proposal. Maybe I should, not for the world, but for myself. To leave something behind, something that isn't just money. Lena smiled, pleased. That would be wonderful, Flynn, and I would love to help. That small project gave Flynn a new energy, a new purpose. He started writing, with Lena by his side, encouraging and listening to every word. And in the process, he realized that life, even in its final chapters, could still have meaning, could still bring joy. The friendship between them not only gave Flynn a reason to live again, but also brought Lena something she had long lost: hope. Amid the fragility of life, they found each other and, with that, a new purpose, a new reason to keep going. The 2 years that followed brought not only moments of joy and companionship, but also the inevitable weight of time. Flynn, who was not young when he arrived at the nursing home, began to feel the inescapable signs of his body weakening. Each day was a battle against exhaustion, and even the small pleasures that once filled his days began to turn into challenges. At first, it was just a persistent tiredness, a fatigue that wouldn't leave him, even after nights of sleep. Lena noticed the changes before he admitted them. She saw the tremor in his hands when he held his teacup, the effort it took for him to get up from his chair, and the way his steps, once slow, were now hesitant. One afternoon, while preparing a warm soup for Flynn, Lena felt her heart ache as she heard his cough. It was a dry, raspy sound that seemed to tear at his throat. She approached with the bowl, but noticed that he could barely hold the spoon. "Let me help, Flynn," she said softly, sitting down beside him. She held the spoon and blew on the soup to cool it before bringing it to his lips. He looked at her with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I hate being a burden, Lena. I don't want you to have to take care of me like this." She put the spoon aside for a moment, holding his hand firmly. "You will never be a burden to me, Flynn. I am here because I want to be. We are friends, and friends take care of each other." Flynn tried to smile, but there was a pain in his eyes that she knew well. "I just wish things were different. I wish I could be strong like you." Lena shook her head, her eyes shining with a tenderness that only true affection can bring. "Strength isn't just in the body, Flynn. You have a strength that few possess, a strength of spirit. It's not easy to go through everything you've been through and still find reasons to smile." He sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "But it's hard, Lena, knowing that I'm getting closer to the end and that there's nothing I can do to stop it." Lena lowered her head, holding back the tears that threatened to escape. She forced herself to smile, to stay calm for him. "What's important is that you're not alone, Flynn. I am here. I will always be here." Over time, Flynn's health deteriorated further. He began to need help with basic tasks like getting dressed and eating. Lena was always by his side, setting aside her own pains and difficulties to ensure he was comfortable. The nights were the hardest. Flynn often woke up in the middle of the night, with pains that seemed to spread throughout his body, and Lena was always there, ready to soothe him, to hold his hand until he fell back asleep. One night, while Lena was adjusting Flynn's blankets, he called out to her with a weak voice. "Lena, do you think this is how it all ends? With us just disappearing?" She paused, feeling her heart ache at the question. She sat down beside him, holding his cold hand between hers. "I don't know, Flynn, but I believe that as long as we are together, as long as we remember each other, nothing truly disappears." Flynn closed his eyes, silent tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "You've given me so much, Lena. I just wish I could give something back." She smiled, gently wiping away his tears. "You already have, Flynn. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a reason to keep going. Taking care of you, it made me feel alive again." The days continued to pass, and Flynn grew weaker. There were moments when Lena had to fight against her own pain, not just the physical, but the emotional, as she watched her dear friend deteriorate before her eyes. But she never let him see her suffering. She smiled, held his hand, and talked about the memories they shared, about the good days, trying to keep alive the flame of life that still remained in him. Flynn, even in his weakened state, still found comfort in Lena's presence. And while their bodies fought against the inevitable, their hearts found a peace that perhaps they had never known without each other's company. In that nursing home, amid the fragility of life, Flynn and Lena discovered that even in the most difficult circumstances, friendship and love could offer a form of redemption, a way to find meaning until the very last breath. Flynn's time was running out, and he felt it in every bone, in every slow beat of his heart. Death, which once seemed like a distant and nebulous concept, was now approaching in a concrete, almost palpable way. But despite the fear that the presence of death brought, there was a serenity in his spirit that he never imagined he would feel. He knew he had little time, and this brought an unexpected clarity. There was one last thing he needed to do. One morning, after a restless night, Flynn called Lena to sit beside him. The room was silent, the morning sun casting a soft light over the bed. Lena, always attentive, noticed the seriousness in Flynn's gaze and felt a pang in her heart. "Lena," he began, his voice weak but determined, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've been thinking about for a long time." She moved closer, holding his hand gently. "Whatever it is, Flynn, I'm here to listen." He took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for the words to come. "I know I'm at the end of my journey, and I don't want to leave this world without doing what I think is right. You've been more than a friend to me, Lena. You've been my family, like a mother who cared for me, fed me, cleaned me, like a daughter who listened to me, read to me, and shared so many laughs, and never asked for anything in return." Lena felt tears beginning to form, but she tried to maintain her composure. "You've been like a father to me, Flynn, the father I never had. I will never forget you." Flynn smiled again, closing his eyes for a moment, as if that smile was his goodbye. "Thank you, Lena. Thank you for everything." The following days were marked by a tranquility that only those who have made peace with death can achieve. Flynn was serene, knowing he had done what his heart asked of him. Lena, on the other hand, felt a mix of sadness and gratitude so great that it consumed her. She knew the end was near, and every moment with Flynn was precious. On the morning Flynn passed away, Lena was by his side, holding his hand, just as she had promised. He left in silence, his face calm, as if he were simply falling asleep. Lena felt her heart break as she watched him go, but she knew he had found peace. Lena looked at Flynn, still holding his hand. She whispered softly, as if he could hear her, even in his eternal rest. "You did so much more for me than you can imagine, Flynn. You taught me so many things, and I will be eternally grateful. Rest in peace, my friend." On a gray afternoon, 3 days after Flynn's funeral, his nephews, Andrew and Nicholas, were gathered in the meeting room, anxiously awaiting the lawyer who would bring their uncle's will. The tension in the air was palpable, and the glances exchanged between them were filled with expectation and greed. Lena didn't know why she had been called there, and she watched everything attentively. "Do you think he left everything to us?" Andrew asked, nervously adjusting his tie. "Of course he did," Nicholas replied confidently. "He didn't have anyone else." "Do you know what you're going to do with the old man's money?" Andrew asked. "Because I'm going to sell the mansion and buy a Bentley." The lawyer, a middle-aged man with round-framed glasses, entered the room with a leather folder under his arm. He sat at the table and opened the folder, revealing a sealed envelope. "Let's begin," he said, breaking the seal and unfolding the document. "I, Flynn, in full possession of my mental faculties, leave this will as my last wish." The nephews leaned forward, eager to hear what would follow. "To my nephews, Andrew and Nicholas, go work to earn your own money. You never cared about me, only about what I could offer. I hope one day you find happiness, which is not in money, but in love and gratitude." Andrew and Nicholas were left speechless, unable to believe what they were hearing. "This is absurd," Andrew shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "How could he do this to us?" Nicholas lamented, tears of anger in his eyes. They stood up and left the meeting room, grumbling. The lawyer continued, unperturbed. "For my dear friend Lena, I leave everything I own. Lena, you were by my side, and my last years of life were transformed by knowing your laughter, your songs, and your love in the food. Your kindness and loyalty are invaluable. Lena, who was sitting in a corner of the room, listened to everything in silence, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what was happening. "Flint," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The lawyer handed Lena a smaller envelope containing a handwritten letter from Flynn. She opened the envelope with trembling hands and began to read. "Dear Lena, if you are reading this, it means I have passed away. I want you to know that you were the best friend anyone could have. I will never be able to thank you enough for everything you did for me. I hope you take this money and go see Paris, with its streets full of bistros. Go to Sicily to eat real cannelloni, or to Brazil on a carnival day, just as we always imagined doing. Just be happy, my friend. You deserve the world, and I know I can give you a little bit of it. Allow yourself to fulfill your dreams and live a full and happy life. You deserve this and so much more. With all my love, Flynn." Lena cried with emotion and longing for her dear friend. "Thank you, Flynn," she murmured, clutching the letter to her chest. "I will make every moment count."